They called me a failure the night Mom was dying. Said I was chasing ghosts. Said I couldn't even keep a desk job, as if I hadn't been halfway across the world pulling bleeding soldiers out of gunfire. They didn't know where I was, what I did, or who I had become. But that didn't stop them from laughing over the ham and mashed potatoes. "You look tired," my sister sneered. "What do you even do now, anyway?" Dad didn't even look up. "She probably works security at a warehouse or something." My hands shook under the table. Not from shame, but restraint. They had no idea. They never wanted to know. Then it happened. A sharp voice cracked over the intercom, loud, clear, cutting through the entire terminal. "Clear the way for Army General. Repeat, clear the way for Army General." Silence hit like a thunderclap. I stood. Every uniformed officer in the vicinity turned and saluted. My niece dropped her fork. My brother-in-law whispered, "Wait, what?" I walked forward, my boots echoing like thunder against the marble floor. The ribbons on my uniform caught the light. My name tag, Quinn, gleamed under the spotlights. They called me a failure. But the world had already recognized who I was. Now they had no choice but to see it too. My name is Quinn Taylor, and for years I let them call me a disappointment, because it was easier than explaining who I really was. But not anymore. Before I share my story, I want to know you are here with me. Just say, "listening" in the comments, or let me know where you are. I love hearing how far my story reach. And if you believe stories like mine deserve to be heard, hit subscribe. Sometimes the smallest show of support is the loudest kind of justice. Thank you. And now, here's my story. The summer heat in Fredericksburg felt heavier than I remembered. It clung to my skin like regret as I turned the wheel of my battered Jeep tires, crunching on the familiar gravel of my parents' driveway. The American flag still swayed on the front porch like it had every day of my childhood, rigid, unwavering, proud. That flag had watched my father, Colonel Tom Quinn, salute every morning for 40 years. Today it watched me come home after 8 years of silence. The house hadn't changed. White shutters, red brick, the creaky swing on the porch. But I had. The last time I stood here, I was shouting across the dinner table, spitting words through tears, while my father's face turned crimson with fury. "You're destroying this family's legacy," he had roared. I left West Point that night with nothing but a duffel bag and a decision I couldn't take back. No one knew I didn't leave the war. I just chose a different one the military doesn't put on brochures. I parked beside Nate's sleek government-issued sedan and cut the engine. My hands stayed on the wheel longer than they needed to. Breathing wasn't easy. The backyard buzzed with chatter. Nate stood at the center like a statue of polished brass, his Air Force Blues crisp insignia gleaming. Around him swirled relatives I barely recognized, laughing too loud, holding drinks too tightly. On his arm, Emily, his fiancée, and a military lawyer radiated charm and calculation in equal parts. Her smile didn't reach her eyes, but it sliced clean like a scalpel. I stepped into view. Conversations dimmed by a half-second, like someone had turned down the volume just long enough to make me notice. Mom looked up from the grill. Her apron was spotless, her hair perfect. "Sarah, you didn't say you were coming," she said, voice flat as the paper plates stacked beside her. Dad barely glanced my way. His eyes skimmed the frayed cuffs of my jacket, the worn jeans, the absence of any uniform. "You're late," he muttered, then turned back to hear Nate regale someone with a story about a deployment in Qatar. I hovered by the dessert table, clutching a can of warm soda I didn't want. No one asked where I'd been. No one dared. Emily's voice rang out behind me, bright and slicing. "Sarah left West Point to find herself. What was it again? Some NGO work." The laugh that followed wasn't cruel. It was worse, dismissive. That night I slept in the basement on a folding cot surrounded by Nate's old trophies. My childhood bedroom had been converted into Emily's wedding command center, lace samples, RSVP envelopes, bridesmaid schedules taped to the walls. I didn't belong anywhere in this house anymore. I slid a wooden box out from beneath the cot. Inside was a photograph of me in my cadet uniform standing next to my father at West Point. We were both smiling. I was 19. I believed in a version of honor that still had room for me. But I wasn't that girl anymore. Not after Kandahar. Not after the blood and the missions that don't exist on paper. I held the photo under the dim basement light and closed my eyes. I could still hear the bombs, still see the faces. I had come back to this house, but nothing in it recognized me. And I wasn't sure I recognized myself either. The invitation to Nate's promotion ceremony had come in the form of a text sent the night before. If you want to come, it's at Fort Belvoir. No pressure. It read like pity with punctuation. I debated not going. But old instincts die hard. I showed up in a black coat, quiet, unassuming, invisible. The auditorium buzzed with applause, dress uniforms, the click of polished shoes. Nate looked like a magazine cover. The pride in my parents' faces could have lit the room. I took a seat in the back where no one would notice me. That was the goal. Fade into the walls, be the shadow they always accused me of becoming. The ceremony ended. Families surged forward for photos, hugs, cheers. I stood to leave, wrapping my coat tighter around me when a voice sliced through the hum of celebration. Major General Quinn, I didn't expect to see you here. I turned. Time stilled. It was General Mark Travis. He stood in full regalia, taller than I remembered, his eyes sharp as ever. He extended a hand, a salute. A perfect, clean salute. The kind you give to someone who's earned it in blood. I returned it out of reflex. My pulse thudded in my ears. Whispers rippled across the room. Heads turned. Emily's hand trembled. She dropped her coffee, the mug shattering against the floor. Mom stared, frozen. Dad blinked as if he'd seen a ghost. And Nate? Nate looked at me like he'd never seen me before. Travis stepped closer. Didn't think I'd run into the night wolf outside Kabul. A nearby lieutenant gasped, eyes wide. She's night wolf. That was real. Another murmured. I thought that was classified myth. I didn't answer. I just nodded at Travis, gripped his hand once, and walked out as quietly as I had come in. Later that night, I sat alone at a bar off base. Bourbon in front of me, silence all around. My phone buzzed. A message from Travis. You can't hide forever, Quinn. They need to know who you are. You owe it to the team. I stared at the screen for a long time, thumb hovering over the reply. He was right. I had hidden in the shadows for years, letting my past shrink until it barely touched my present. But it was catching up now in generals and whispers in the stunned faces of my family. I had been a ghost for so long I forgot what it felt like to be seen. But ghosts don't get saluted. Soldiers do. The motel sat just off the highway, its neon sign flickering like a pulse on the edge of collapse. I'd checked in under a fake name 2 nights ago, a habit I never truly broke. The room smelled faintly of bleach and desperation. I sat cross-legged on the faded bedspread, the hum of the air conditioner masking the silence. I powered on my secure laptop, fingers moving on instinct as I logged into a private intelligence network I still had partial access to. What I saw hit harder than any ambush. My breath snagged in my throat. I traced the breach. Protocols still burned into my muscle memory, guided me through encryption layers. I followed the trail through a private military research database, nothing unusual until the thread veered sharply into a civilian email. The recipient, Emily Harris. Emily. My brother's fiancée, a military lawyer. The same woman who had mocked me over hamburgers in the backyard less than 48 hours ago. The sender, Derek Tate. I hadn't heard that name in years. A former data analyst assigned briefly to Operation Nightwolf before his security clearance was revoked and he disappeared into the ether. And now here he was, sending files to Emily under the subject, Women in Combat, a Gender Policy Draft. I opened the attachment. My screen filled with mission logs, satellite footage, stills, encoded audio transcripts. It was all there the entirety of our 2014 campaign in Afghanistan when we dismantled a chemical weapons operation run by a regional warlord. Everything we were promised would be redacted forever. Everything that was supposed to be buried with our ghosts. And my name was on every page. I drove straight to Nate and Emily's condo, fury pounding in my chest like a second heartbeat. She opened the door, still in uniform, face-pale eyes rimmed red. "Sarah," she whispered. "I didn't know. I swear. You didn't know you were reading a classified kill operation. I thought it was research material for a policy paper?" She stammered. "Derek said it was cleared. It came through a legal channel, or at least it looked like one. Do you know what you've done?" My voice was low but sharp. "You didn't just compromise a file, you put lives at risk." Tears welled in her eyes. "They suspended me yesterday. I didn't mean to, please believe that. I wanted to scream. Instead, I stepped back, my voice colder than steel. Meaning doesn't undo damage. What Emily didn't know, couldn't know, was that the leak had come at the worst possible time. A Senate subcommittee on armed forces was deep in debate on female roles in combat units, and leading that debate was Senator Karen Wells, a known hardliner who believed women didn't belong beyond a desk in the military. Now she had ammunition. My name and others from Nightwolf were already circling in the shadows, blogs, political rumor forums, nameless sources quoting hero-turned-myth. We were being deconstructed in real time. That night alone again, in the motel room, I received an encrypted message from someone I hadn't heard from in years. Sender R. Lee. Subject: Urgent message. "Sarah, it's happening. If they expose our identities, they'll go after the civilians we protected. They'll target the villages, the families. I've gone dark. You should too." Rachel Viper Lee, the only person who had ever pulled me out of a kill zone with a broken arm and half her ribs shattered. If she was sending this, it was serious. I stared at the screen long after the message blinked out. This wasn't just about my name anymore, or my shame, or my father's silence. This was about the people we risked our lives for and the ones we lost. If their blood was going to be dragged through politics and ego, then I had to do something. The war wasn't over. It had just moved to a different battlefield, and I knew how to fight in the dark. The envelope was heavy and sealed with a stamp I hadn't seen since the last time I walked into a classified briefing room. It arrived at the front desk of the motel just past dawn. No return address. Just a courier who said my name with practiced neutrality. Inside, a letter of temporary reinstatement signed by the Secretary of Defense himself. My assignment was clear: lead a joint cyber intelligence and ground unit on a new operation called Iron Veil. Our target, a terrorist syndicate in Somalia, with a rapidly developing cyber warfare wing. Intelligence suggested they had ties to Nightwolf data leaks, and worse, they were planning a multi-vector attack on U.S. diplomatic assets in Nairobi. One of their encrypted server scripts included a familiar sequence, one I'd personally designed for a comms scrambler used by Nightwolf in Kandahar. Only 2 people outside of my team ever had access to that code. One of them was me, the other was Derek Tate. I arrived at Fort Belvoir later that afternoon, walking into the strategic ops room in jeans and a plain black tee. No medals, no dress blues, no fanfare. The room was full of young analysts and hardened veterans, all younger than I had been when I first saw Blood on Sand. They looked at me like I was an artifact. A woman in digital camo sat at the head of the digital ops table. Short red hair, piercing blue eyes, arms folded across her chest. "Captain Jess Parker," she said without standing. "Lead cyber operations." "No offense, ma'am, but your file's nearly blank. Classified," they said. "We're trusting a ghost with live assets." The room went still. I didn't blink. I walked to the digital map on the wall, tapped into the control panel, and brought up the Iron Veil blueprint. Covert drop points, network access nodes, predicted chokeholds. Then I showed them the satellite pass that intercepted the Nairobi comms spike. "That's a Nightwolf signal. I wrote it, which means I know what it can do, and how to stop it." No one spoke for a full 10 seconds. Jess finally nodded. All right then. What's the plan? Split approach, I said. Jess, you'll coordinate the digital breach. Real-time infiltration, no lag. My team will move on Hassan's location, a storage hub outside Mogadishu. Once you shut down their comms, we breach. We get an extract intel and dismantle the network node. A few eyes lit up. The plan was risky, sharp, clean. But something else gnawed at me. A secondary server, a back-channel loop buried in encrypted chatter, was transmitting our own preparation movements. Someone was feeding Hassan's team our playbook. I spent the rest of the evening digging through our internal clearances. Twist confirmed only one person had historical access to Nightwolf and new access to Iron Veil assets. Tate. After he was dismissed for falsifying contract budgets, he kept copies of our movement and strategy files. And now I believed he was selling that data to an independent intelligence broker, one with political ties to Karen Wells' communications team. I needed confirmation, so I called the one person who'd worked beside him before he disappeared. Emily. We met at a coffee shop near the base. The smell of burned espresso clung to the air like guilt. Do you know he's selling our data? I asked. She shook her head. I knew he'd gone dark, but this… No. Sarah, I swear. I cut her off. Don't swear. Just help me find him. Emily hesitated, then nodded. Give me access. I'll dig. I still have a few back doors open in procurement logs. I handed her a burner phone. 3 days, I said. I'm done playing defense. She looked up at me, eyes no longer filled with contempt, but with resolve. I used to think I understood who you were, she said. I didn't. But I will now. I promise. As I walked away, the pieces were falling into place. This wasn't about redemption anymore. It was about cutting the cancer out at the root. We landed in Mogadishu under a moonless sky, the kind of darkness that pressed against your skin like wet cloth. The wind smelled of salt and burning oil. The convoy took back roads through skeletal neighborhoods where bullet-pocked buildings leaned over the streets like they were tired of standing. I sat behind the driver, silent, counting my breath and feeling the familiar throb in my shoulder with every bump. The old injury from Kandahar had flared up again, the scar tissue deep enough now that it hummed like a tuning fork when something felt wrong. Our objective was simple on paper. Jess would breach their network remotely, collapse the comms infrastructure. My team would storm a warehouse in the industrial sector, where Hassan, the orchestrator of the leak and suspected leader of the Somali cyber cell, was believed to be hiding. 2 fronts, 1 hit, in and out. I knew better than to believe in clean missions. We arrived at the breach point 10 minutes ahead of schedule. Our boots touched gravel, the radios clicked alive. Jess's voice came through clear, steady, confident. I'm in. I signaled the team forward, my breath calm, even as my shoulders screamed with every motion. The perimeter of the warehouse was quiet. Too quiet. Then Jess's voice cracked with tension. Sarah, this isn't right. There's nothing here. No active nodes. No data. This system's a dummy. I barely had time to respond before the first blast shook the ground. A drone tore through the night sky like a blade, strafing the alley behind us with precision fire. The rear guard scrambled for cover, and suddenly we were pinned down in the middle of a kill box. The warehouse had been a setup. We'd walked right into it. Pull back, I shouted. Disperse pattern. Smoke and decoy now. We launched thermal jammers and smoke grenades, flooding the street with false heat signatures. I divided the team, sending 2 through the western flank, while I ducked into a side alley, dragging Alex, our comms tech, by his vest. He was bleeding from a wound just above his knee, but conscious. Jess's voice rang into my ear again, louder now, panicked. They knew our route, they knew our timing, someone gave them our blueprint. We pushed forward, cutting through a corridor of crumbling walls and sand-choked floors. The warehouse rose in front of us, hollow and ghostly, lit only by flickering security lights. Inside, I found Hassan crouched over a hard case, his fingers dancing across a terminal. Wires fed into a black box with a blinking red diode. A bomb. Not just any bomb. a satellite-linked payload with an uplink built from encryption code I had personally developed during Nightwolf's final months. It was like staring at a scar that had learned how to bleed again. 12 seconds on the timer. I dropped beside the case, breath-sharp vision tunneling. My fingers trembled as I disconnected the remote uplink, isolating the kill switch. My shoulder burned. I could feel blood soaking into my collar. I gritted my teeth and cut the final circuit with 2 seconds to spare. Package disabled, I said. Jess came back online. I've traced the satellite control hub. Guess who funded it? A shell org linked to Wells's office. Same names, same chain of command. I looked down at Hassan, unconscious now, zip-tied and bloody. This wasn't just an ambush, it was a message. They hadn't just wanted us dead, they'd wanted to bury Nightwolf for good. We moved out in silence, hauling Alex between us. Dust clung to our faces. I caught Jess watching me as we reached the evac point. Her eyes weren't skeptical anymore. "You let us out," she said. "You saved all of us." Alex, groggy but alert, murmured, "I know who you are now." I nodded, too tired to speak, but somewhere in the fatigue something settled. I was done being a ghost. That part of me burned off under Mogadishu's fire. I wasn't the shadow in someone else's war anymore. I was the one leading them out. Emily didn't disappear. After the operation, while I recovered at Walter Reed, she got to work. Her name still held enough weight to access procurement archives and chain of custody documents buried in bureaucratic hell. And what she found was damning. A digital paper trail, encrypted messages between Derek Tate and an anonymous account named Falcon Red, financial statements from shell companies. The smoking gun wasn't just there, it had been filed, cataloged, and nearly hidden in plain sight. She called me one evening, her voice thinner than I'd ever heard it. "I have what you need, and I'm going to testify." I didn't thank her. Not because I wasn't grateful, but because there were no words large enough to cover what that decision meant. She was putting everything, career, reputation, safety, on the line. For me, for the team, for the truth. The Pentagon hearing was scheduled within the week. It wasn't a courtroom, but it may as well have been. The walls were white, the carpet gray, the mood glacial. Reporters weren't allowed, but everyone knew. Leaks had already turned Nightwolf into a political storm. Some called us traitors. Others called us ghosts. No one called us soldiers. The night before the hearing, I went home. Not to a motel. Home. My parents' house hadn't changed, but the people inside had. My mother opened the door with red eyes and trembling hands. "We thought you abandoned us," she said. "When you left West Point, I thought you left us too." My father sat in his chair by the mantel, metals glinting in the low light. His voice when he spoke was quiet. "I should have asked what you were going through instead of assuming what you weren't." He reached into the drawer beside him and pulled out a folded photograph, me and Nate in the front yard as kids. I had my arms stretched like a tent over him, blocking the sun. "You've always protected people," he said, "even before you were a soldier." He stood and placed the photo in my hand. "No matter what they say tomorrow, I know who you are. You're my daughter." It was the first time he'd said that in 8 years. I walked into the hearing the next morning, not as a defendant, but as myself. Karen Wells sat across the table, her expression clinical, predatory. "Major General Quinn," she said, "you've operated in the shadows of unsanctioned missions and violated protocol. What evidence do you have that these operations were legal?" I reached into my folder and slid forward the original Nightwolf logs. Every action, every decision, unredacted. Included was the mission in Kabul where I halted a drone strike because a civilian convoy appeared at the last second. I played the footage from my body cam. Abort. Abort. Civilian presence confirmed. "Hold your fire." I repeat, hold your fire. No embellishment, no score. Just my voice cracking in the heat of war. Then Emily stepped up. She presented the emails, the financial trail. The payments wired to a consulting firm, then funneled to Tate through a backdoor account connected to Falcon Red, identified and confirmed as Senator Wells's senior aide. The room was silent. Wells adjusted her blazer, but said nothing. The Secretary of Defense turned to me. General Quinn, you acted with restraint, wisdom, and honor. This committee hereby restores your full rank, clears your record, and formally recognizes the actions of Operation Nightwolf as critical to national security. I stood there steady as stone. I was no longer someone they could hide behind classified codes, and I was no longer hiding from myself. The night after the hearing, I sat alone in my hotel room. The beige wallpaper looked the same as it had 2 weeks ago, but everything inside me had shifted. The silence wasn't heavy tonight, it was earned. I powered up the encrypted terminal and checked the inbox I hadn't touched since the Nightwolf days. It had only one new message, time-stamped 10 minutes after the gavel came down. From R. Lee. Subject for the one who stayed awake. There was no body text, just an attachment. I opened it. A scanned image of a handwritten letter filled the screen. You kept your promise. We've all been watching. Some from the shadows, some from new lives they built when the war ended. But we never stopped believing you'd do what we couldn't. You stood up. You reminded them we existed. We were Nightwolf. We never slept. And we still don't. The last line sat centered at the bottom of the page, underscored once firm and deliberate. Alongside the scan was a second image, one that stopped me cold. It was a photo of a silver bracelet, dull with wear but still intact. On the underside, etched in small block letters, was the symbol we used to whisper to each other over black coffee, and broken nights, lupus non-dormit, the wolf does not sleep. I reached into the drawer beside the bed and pulled out the original bracelet. Mine. I hadn't worn it since Kabul. The clasp still worked, the chain still caught the light. I called Rachel. It rang once, then a familiar voice, lower, softer than I remembered, but steady. I heard she said, "I didn't think anyone was still listening." "We always were," she replied. "We were just waiting for you to roar again." I didn't speak right away. My eyes burned. "You made us visible again, Sarah. You made sure the story didn't die in silence." When the call ended, I sat at the window and slipped the bracelet onto my wrist. The weight of it was gentle. Known. I stared into the night sky over Virginia, lit orange by street lamps and passing cars. The kind of sky that tells you the world is still turning, even if you feel like standing still. The war wasn't over. Not really. There would always be another version, another corridor of shadows. But I wasn't running anymore. A chapter had closed, but I was still here, and I would answer if ever they called again. Veterans Day arrived with the first frost of the season. Fredericksburg was draped in flags and folded chairs, the square downtown transformed into a quiet monument to service. I arrived just before dawn, not in uniform, but not hiding either. The banner over the stage read, "Honoring Major General Sarah Quinn, Nightwolf and Operation Iron Veil." I never thought I'd see my name above a crowd, much less without controversy shadowing every syllable. The event began with the usual honors introductions, applause. Then the MC paused. Our first speaker today, someone who has learned the cost of judgment and the power of truth. Please welcome Emily Quinn. She stepped up to the microphone wearing a simple black suit. I could feel every eye shift from her to me and back again. "My sister-in-law taught me something I never expected to learn," she began, voice strong. "That courage doesn't always wear a uniform. Sometimes it wears silence, sometimes it walks alone, and sometimes it walks back into the fire after everyone else has left." There was no apology in her voice, just recognition. My father stepped up next. His hands trembled slightly as he held the new medal in his palm. He didn't try to make a speech, he just pinned it to my chest and said, "I was wrong, Sarah. You did what I never dared dream of." He stepped back, jaw tight, eyes wet. Nate followed, dressed in his formal blues. He snapped a salute crisp and full. Then, when no one else could hear, he leaned in. "You were always the better soldier, and the braver sibling. Always." My mother hugged me so tightly I thought she might crack my ribs. No words. Just the kind of embrace you give to someone you finally understand. I hadn't prepared any remarks, but when the MC turned toward me, the crowd already waiting, I walked to the mic anyway. The light was sharp on my face. The wind quieted. The town waited. I used to think being forgotten was a punishment, I said, voice steady. But I've learned it's not the world that defines you. It's what you choose to remember about yourself. If you've ever been told your story didn't matter, or that your silence meant failure, don't believe them. Your story has weight. It has teeth. It has the power to outlive fear. I was erased once, but not anymore. Applause rose, not polite but thunderous. Cameras flashed. Somewhere behind me, I heard Emily crying. After the ceremony, as the crowd filtered out, a young veteran approached me. Barely out of adolescence, with sharp eyes and a shy gait. He held a neatly folded American flag in both hands. "My dad served in Kandahar," he said quietly. "He told me about you, about what you did. He said he came home because of you." I took the flag with both hands, a lump rising in my throat. "Thank you," I managed. "That means more than you know." He shook his head. "No, ma'am, thank you." As the crowd dispersed, I wandered toward the memorial wall. Names etched in stone, sacrifices carved into memory. Near the bottom, a new line had been added. Major General Sarah Quinn, Nightwolf, mission without end. My fingertips traced the inscription. The metal was cold, but my heart wasn't. For the first time in nearly a decade, I wasn't drifting. I was home, not just with my family, but with myself. After the ceremony in Fredericksburg, after the clapping faded and the cameras shut off, I should have felt at peace. My name had been cleared, my rank reinstated, my family restored. And yet that persistent weight on my chest told me something was unfinished. One night back in D.C., I was sitting by the window of a guest apartment lent to me by an old contact. The city lights blinked beyond the glass like warnings, not invitations. My encrypted phone lit up with a name I hadn't seen since the last coded message from Mogadishu. Rachel. Sarah. Her voice came through sharp, low, and certain. "There's a funding stream. It hasn't stopped. An offshore account linked to the same digital signature we saw in Iron Veil. The coordination didn't end with Wells. Falcon Red is still operating. Whoever's behind this, they're not done." The air seemed to tighten around me. I nodded, though she couldn't see it. "Send everything." The next morning, I walked straight into the Interagency Security Council office in D.C., flashing a temporary clearance badge I hadn't used in years. The building hadn't changed, same sterile walls, same cold stares from young analysts who hadn't yet been burned by war. In a private briefing room, I reviewed the data Rachel had passed along. It was worse than I expected. Falcon Red wasn't just some lone operator or corrupted aide. He was a conduit, a strategic asset embedded in a conservative policy advisory network, one that specialized in influence operations, funding disinformation campaigns, and shaping policy from the shadows. What chilled me deeper, one of the network's top funders, was a defense consulting firm that had once sponsored Derek Tate's original clearance. The same firm had funneled money through third parties to maintain a private archive of classified military data, including Night Wolf's. They never lost the data by accident. They held it intentionally. Insurance. Leverage. I reached out to Jess Parker. She was now promoted and stationed at Cyber Command. We met at a quiet diner near Arlington, boots muddy from the morning sleet. I laid out the evidence in front of her. Jess leaned over the files and sat quietly for a moment. Then she looked me in the eye. "If you can prove the connection to Wells, I'll testify. But we'll need more than this. Something recorded. Something that can't be dismissed as hearsay." There was only one person left who might have that kind of proof. Emily. She had been transferred to a nonprofit veterans legal clinic after the fallout. She was rebuilding quietly. But when I called, she didn't hesitate. She agreed to meet in person. Her office was small, tucked between a post office and a bakery that smelled like cinnamon and ghosts. She poured coffee into chipped mugs and sat across from me, eyes tired but clear. She called me, Emily said. Karen Wells, right after the hearing, she offered me a spot on the Military Justice Reform Committee. All I had to do was walk away from you. I stared. Did you record it? She nodded slowly. I didn't mean to. I'd been recording calls automatically, trying to protect myself during the investigation. I never deleted it. I just didn't know if I had the strength to use it. She pulled up the audio file and hit play. Wells's voice came through sharp and unmistakable. If you continue to back Sarah Quinn, neither you nor your husband-to-be will find a place in this city again. I promise you that. Be smart, Emily. Stay silent. I looked across the desk. Are you ready to stand up? Emily didn't blink. I'm ready, not just because of you, but because I'm done living afraid of people who confuse power with permission. We gathered everything: emails, bank statements, donation ledgers, and the audio. Jess joined us. Together we handed it over to the office of the Inspector General quietly and without ceremony. In less than 48 hours, Senator Karen Wells was suspended pending investigation. A federal inquiry began into the funding mechanisms and data manipulation tied to Falcon Red's network. I didn't feel victorious. I felt clean. Later that week, I stood on the steps of the Pentagon at sunset, the stone warm from the day's heat, the wind cool against my face. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting to be believed. I wasn't holding my breath for justice, because I wasn't alone anymore. Months passed. Winter came. I found myself standing on a wooden porch in Montana, wrapped in a worn flannel and Rachel's old scent of cedar and black coffee. Her farm sat between two slow hills, the snow barely dusting the fence lines. A child's laughter rang from somewhere inside the house. We sat on the porch together, our mugs steaming between us. You know, Rachel said, setting hers down, they still don't know what to call us. The army, the media, the historians? I smiled. They never did. She reached into a folder and handed me a magazine folded open to a feature spread. It was a special edition on modern warfare, its evolving frontlines, and invisible heroes. The headline read, "The Unknown Women Who Changed the Rules of War." There were no names, no photos, just a single quote highlighted in bold. Some operations were so cleanly buried, their operators became myths. But without them, modern tactical doctrine would not exist. Rachel laughed softly. We're still shadows, but now we're the kind that cast long light, I said. When I returned to Fredericksburg that December, the town was draped in garlands and gold. Inside my childhood home, I found my father hammering a new frame to the wall. It was the photo from Veterans Day, me in dress blues standing behind a podium. He placed it beside my old West Point graduation photo. Below it, a simple inscription, Sarah Quinn, Major General, the warrior without a name. Emily and Nate had married quietly in a small chapel outside town. The reception was modest but filled with light. Toward the end of the night, Emily found me standing near the edge of the crowd. She took my hand gently. If I ever have a daughter, she whispered, I want her to know who you are. I didn't speak, I just nodded. Some truths don't need apologies, only acknowledgement. That night in the quiet of my room, I pulled out the old wooden box I once hid beneath a cot in the basement. Inside was the photo of me and my father at West Point. A girl who still believed in bright futures and clean definitions of duty. I sat at the desk and wrote something on the back of that photo. Then I wrapped it in linen, tucked the silver Nightwolf bracelet beside it, and slid in a folded letter addressed to a young lieutenant in the mentorship program I now sponsored. When they call you a shadow, smile. Shadows only exist because there's light. And if you're a wolf, you don't need applause to know you're strong. I sealed the envelope. Outside, the snow was falling. Inside, I burned bright. Sometimes what breaks us isn't the battle, it's being unseen after the battle ends. But the truth is, strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it stands quietly, refuses to be erased, and dares to be whole. No title can define your worth, and no silence can hide your story forever. If this story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe to stay connected. Your voice matters. Thank you for being here.